Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be giving you my detailed Shadow Priest PvE raiding DPS guide for TBC Classic. Here are the topics that I want to cover in the video. First of all, I want to talk about the race options, then talents, gear and stat priority, gems and enchants, the rotation with some cheeky little tricks to push your DPS further, then add-ons to increase your DPS, and then lastly we'll finish with macros, consumables and professions. I'll put timestamps down below in a pinned comment. For some reason I can't put timestamps in the video bar because YouTube gave me some unexplainable channel strike a while ago and now I can no longer do that for some reason. But anyway, let's jump in. So first of all, let's talk about races. I don't want to spend ages talking about each and every single racial. Let's go for the Alliance first. Night Elf is the best DPS option on the Alliance side. Star Shards will provide a slightly better DPS increase. There's not much more to talk about it other than that. It also has an increased chance to obviously proc the Eye of Magpharodon trinket, so it is kind of nice to have. But anyway, for the Horde, so basically Undead is better in early TBC, but Troll will be slightly better than Undead on more of a long term. But overall I would say there's not much difference between the DPS increase that either a Troll or an Undead provides. I would just kind of go with whatever race you prefer. But yeah, Troll is kind of underrated, firstly because of Berserking, which is a really nice haste buff. You can take advantage of that a lot because you will be dropping your HP with Shadow Word Death, so it's easy to take advantage of Berserking. Plus you can actually take advantage of Shadow Guard on some fights, and because it scales 1-to-1 with your spell power, it actually does a decent amount of damage. Obviously with Undead you have Devouring Plague, which is obviously a slight DPS increase. It is a bigger DPS increase than, you know, the Night Elf Star Shard, and then you also have Will of the Forsaken to pop yourself out of fears, which can from time to time be quite a decent DPS increase because, you know, without that racial you'd have to sit in a full crowd control. Anyway guys, let's now jump into the talents. So in tier 1, most people just prefer to go for Spirit Tap. You can take advantage of that mana regeneration in particular boss fights from time to time if you're lucky enough to get the killing blow on a particular ad, so that is quite useful. Blackout, it's kind of nice to have, but honestly sometimes it kind of causes complications. You know, it makes it difficult for a tank to like clump up enemies together because one of the enemies has been randomly stunned, so I rather not go for Blackout. Then we just go for improved Shadow Word Pain, and you're going to max out Shadow Infinity, and you're also going to max out Shadow Focus. And you simply max these out because, you know, these two talents here, very simple DPS increase. Shadow Focus makes it much easier for you to get the hit cap, which is really nice. I mean, you may be taking 1 point out of Shadow Affinity, but Shadow Priest threat is just absolutely disgusting. So I would always just max this out, unless you get to a point in your raid group where you can really trust your tanks to keep aggro off you. But normally 3 out of 3 is just the way to go. We're also going to max out Improved Mind Blasts. There's also like a lot of debate when it comes to the Improved Mind Blast. Like some people like to go 4 out of 5, some people like to go to 5 out of 5. Basically, most people like agree that just going 5 out of 5 is the biggest DPS increase, and there you go, it's end of story. And also you want My Flay, because that's a spell we use, obviously. Then we're going to max out Shadow Reach. We're only going to put 4 points in Shadow Weaving. You don't really need 5 points in this talent to maintain the debuff, so it's not really needed. Then we're going to go for Vampiric Embrace. Then we're going to max out Focus Mind. We're going to max out Darkness. We're obviously going to get Shadow Form. Then we're going to max out Misery. We're obviously going to get Vampiric Touch. We're going to put 4 points into Shadow Power, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. It's just a slight DPS increase, but we're not really going to be critting a lot as a Shadow Priest. Then from here we're going to max out Unbreakable Will. It's a slight DPS increase in certain situations where you will get either stunned, feared or silenced by boss mechanics, so it's quite nice to have. Then from here we're going to max out Improved Power Word and Improved Power Word Fortitude. This basically just provides the best utility for the raid. Then we're going to max out Meditation and put 1 point into Inner Focus because it's a slight DPS increase and obviously saves mana as well. Then this is basically, looking at it right now, I definitely haven't made any mistakes here. This is the best in-slot, you know, Shadow Priest build that you can go for. You may want to take 1 point out of Focus Mind and put it into Shadow Power for a very, very minuscule DPS increase, but only if you have absolutely zero mana issues, which you will probably get around about the 9,000 to 10,000 mana mark. So let's talk about best in slot gear very briefly. What I've got for you is 2 links in the description of this video to the more realistic best in slot gear that you're probably fairly easily obtain just by playing the game, and then there's an ultimate extremely sweaty best in slot list that's a bit harder to obtain because you'll be relying on extremely rare drops and expensive pieces. I'll give you an example of this. So, you know, in this best in slot list we've got Mindblade from Karazhan, but then in the sweaty best in slot list we have the mace from doing Arena, which realistically most people aren't gonna, you know, have the time or the skill to do. The Lurker's Cord of Shadow Wrath is also here, which is a very rare item to get, but it is best in slot. The problem with playing a Shadow Priest is we don't scale incredibly well with haste and crit, particularly crit, so this is why you see like these random really big chunky spell power pieces as best in slot pieces, because they just simply provide better DPS and there's not much else you can do about it. This is what the spell priority looks like. You're gonna stack spell hit until you get the cap, then it's shadow damage, then spell haste, then spell crit. Now, the amount of hit that you need depends on a number of things. First of all, how many talents you have in Shadow Focus, and then also whether you have a Draenei in the group or an Elemental Shaman in the group. Your baseline hit chance with 5 points in Shadow Focus is 76 points of spell hit. Then if you have a Draenei in the group, it is 63 points, but then if you have a Draenei Shaman, it's going to be 38 points. But then if you have a caster Draenei and Totem of Wrath, then it's going to be 26 points, so basically next to nothing. It's important to note though guys that you have to be in range of that Draenei or that Elemental Shaman to benefit from that extra spell hit. So obviously be mindful of where they actually are, and if you can't be close enough to them to benefit from the buffs, then you have to bring an extra gear piece with you that is going to, you know, tip you to the cap. Now I briefly want to talk about haste breakpoints. So long story short, you know, you stack spell haste after spell damage and you just do it as much as you can. You don't really worry about it too much, you just avoid spell crit. Well, basically a haste breakpoint is when you will achieve a certain amount of haste where you can fit in another Mind Flay tick into your rotation before you clip it. And it's only possible in phase 3 because we just simply need better haste from our gear. I'll put the haste breakpoints in the description and I will put them on the screen right now, but you don't really need to start worrying about this until phase 3 because it will change your rotation, and it'll make more sense when I, you know, talk about the rotation later. And when it comes to gems and enchants, normally you just always avoid meta gems because they're total pants for a Shadow Priest, and you know, all the gems and enchants will be included in those best in slot lists, so you just kind of copy that and it's Bob's your uncle. So now it's time to talk about the rotation. Let's first of all start by talking about the priority list. So the first priority is Vampiric Touch, then Shadow Word Pain, then Mind Blast, then Shadow Word Death, then your race ability, which would be Star Shards or Devouring Plague, and then you fill in with a Mind Flay. However, it is not as simple as that. So below the haste break point, what you want to be doing is actually clipping a Mind Flay. So when you are casting a Mind Flay, right, and you have Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death available, then you will cast either a Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death early, but only after the second tick of Mind Flay has occurred. It's really very simple guys. Whenever you are casting a Mind Flay and you have Mind Blast available or Shadow Word Death available, you will clip it before the last tick pops off. You try to time it just like a millisecond after the second tick. You should also be clipping the Mind Flay if you need to refresh one of your dots, Vampiric Touch and Shadow Word Pain. And the only time when you will stop clipping your Mind Flay is when you've achieved a certain amount of haste rating from your gear or during certain buffs like Bloodlust, Berserking or Drums. But like I said, you won't need to worry about this until we've got better gear. You will start to notice that, you know, you'll cast a Mind Flay and then you'll cast obviously the second tick of Mind Flay, but then you'll be very close to the third tick when, you know, Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death becomes available. And you may as well just kind of let the last tick go off because clipping it too close to the last tick would be a DPS loss. When it comes to refreshing your dots to snapshot spell power buffs, it's impossible to do without it being a DPS loss. The reason why it's a DPS loss is, first of all, you will clip your dot ticks. You'll make your dot ticks longer than they need to be because you're basically refreshing them, right? Which will waste DPS. And then another big reason is because you're spending a global refreshing a dot when you could be spending that global casting Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death, and that simply will be a DPS loss. You need about over 1000 spell power in order for snapshotting to be worth it, so we're probably going to have to wait until like the middle to the end of the Wrath of the Lich King for snapshotting to become more of a, you know, viable play. But for now, it's purely an RNG thing. Like, if you need to refresh your dots and then some spell power thing has popped, then that's just nice to have and it will boost your DPS, but it will be a DPS loss to prioritize refreshing your dots over casting Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death. The only real exception to this is obviously if you're moving, then you can't use Mind Blast, and if you've already used Shadow Word Death, then refreshing your dots will be a slight DPS increase, but it's only when you're moving and it's such a rare circumstance that it's actually going to happen. But on a bonus note, whenever you have to stop, when you have like downtime on the boss for whatever reason, for instance on Gruul when you get CC'd by Shatter, or in Magfarodons when you have to go and walk over to click a box, what I'd recommend for you to do is always refresh your dots before you have to do something like that, or at least refresh Shadow Word Pain, because you won't be able to do DPS during the, you know, the time that it takes for you to go and click that box, but you can continue to deal damage, like a little bit of damage, when you are clicking that box, because if your dots fall off then you're doing absolutely zero damage. And obviously always try to use Shadow Word Death while you are moving if it is safe to do so. It's also a good opportunity to squeeze in a Power Word Shield if you need it for the extra survivability. Now let's move on to talking about the Shadowfiend. So normally when you're low geared and you just started raiding, you mainly just use a Shadowfiend in the opportune moment for you to gain the most amount of mana back to your, you know, your character, because obviously losing mana and getting oomed is a massive DPS loss. But when mana becomes less of an issue, you can use Shadowfiend in an optimal way for increasing your DPS. And the best time to use Shadowfiend is 1 second before Bloodlust. Don't use it after, because then it will benefit from the buff. Use it 1 second before Bloodlust, and that is the best in slot basically way to use Shadowfiend for maximising its DPS. And you should also use it on the lowest armoured target whenever you can. And then obviously don't use it where the raid is going to take a lot of AoE damage and then the Shadowfiend will just die, because the Shadowfiend is kind of weak, he will die. If you want to take this even further, you can use Kibler's Bits and a Strength Scroll, and you can ask a Paladin to use Blessing of Might on the Shadowfiend to buff his DPS even further. That is obviously, you know, a next level of tryhardness. It's important to note that spreading your dots will more or less always be a DPS increase, so just spending a global casting Vampiric Touch or Shadow Word Pain on a new target will always provide basically more value, more DPS value from that global than Mind Blast or Shadow Word Death. So normally spreading your dots is a big DPS increase, so you can do this on Magfarodons and probably quite a lot of fights in Phase 2 as well. The only time where it can start to become a little bit of a DPS loss is when the mobs are too far apart. If the mobs are too far apart, then you have to run to the next mob, and then while you're running, you're obviously doing no damage. If you have to run, you know, to get to a new mob to apply a dot, then always try and squeeze in a Shadow Word Death. But most of the time, running to new enemies to, you know, put dots on them is going to be a DPS loss. It's best to stick to the mobs that you can confidently dot up from where you're going to be stood for the most of the raid fight. I'd always recommend to be aggressive with your mana potions, your destro potions and your dark runes. What I mean by that is use them early in a fight so you can use more of those items in a single fight to get more mana regeneration or more, you know, spell power from the destro potion. If you are prioritizing using destro potions because you're at a point where your raid is basically killing mobs raid bosses so fast that mana isn't an issue, then you probably will need to use dark runes if you know just going to pop destro potions the whole time, you know, just in case that you run out of mana, because obviously running out of mana is a huge DPS loss. I recommend for you to always use Inner Focused or Mind Blast for the chance, the slim chance that it will crit. And then apart from that, if you are an undead, you always have to use it on Devouring Plague, because for some bizarre reason Devouring Plague is like 1000 mana. Another little trick for troll priests, what you can do before a fight is unequip all your gear, then put all your gear back on, and then your health will be reduced. Then you pop Berserk in to get the maximum benefit for it, and then you start the fight. So you do all that just before you start a fight. You can very easily do it with the Itemrack add-on, so you can get the maximum haste buff from Berserking. And obviously when you're going to use it in the middle of a fight, use it straight after Shadow Word Death to increase the amount of haste that it provides to you. Now let's talk about some good add-ons which will increase your DPS. The first add-on I've got for you is a Castbar add-on, which is going to display when your Mind Flay ticks occur, so that you can very easily clip the second tick of a Mind Flay by basically casting the spell when the Castbar gets to that white line. I'd also recommend rotationals just to help you with your rotation a little bit. There's also a cooldown weak aura that I've got for you. There's also mana pot reminder, which is very useful because I'm always forgetting to pop a mana pot, early in a fight, and then, to reuse it later on in a fight. So that's a really good add-on. And then also I've got an add-on for multi-dot timers, which will be much easier when it comes, easier to track your dots when you're multi-dotting on, particular raid fights. For macros, I got 3 good macros for you. The first one is the Shadowfiend macro, which will basically use Kibler's bits on the Shadowfiend the second you spawn it. You just have to spam the macro, you have to just press it twice so that you instantly use that item. And then, yeah, pretty straightforward. I've also really recommend this @cursor mass Dispel macro, which is something I really like. Basically, you don't have to cast mass Dispel and then click on the ground. You can just use the macro, whatever keybind you're using, and automatically cast it on the ground for you. So that's really great. And then I've also got a spammable Mind Flay macro, so you can, sometimes spamming a spell will be a slight DPS increase because you're gonna beat the latency a little bit. But obviously spamming Mind Flay resets Mind Flay. This will stop Mind Flay from resetting itself. And then obviously you've got your Mouseover macros, which I would also recommend as well. And I'll put all these macros in the description down below. When it comes to consumes, it's much simpler than it was in Classic WoW. So first of all, you've got your big boy Flask, the Flask of Pure Death. Basically want to bring that to every single raid. There's a big fat chunky spell power buff. You can go for your Elixir of Shadow Power if you're tight on funds, but the risk with using that one is obviously when you die you have to pop another one, whereas a Flask of Pure Death will exist, throughout death. Then you've got Basilisk food and some other food options as well. You've got the Wizard Oil that you put on your weapon. We've got Mana Pots, Destro Pots, and obviously Demonic Runes and everything like that if you need them. So when it comes to professions, tailoring is just a best in slot profession, and that's it, end of story. It will provide you with the best in slot gear pieces, craftable pieces, throughout the entirety of the expansion. You really don't want to drop tailoring. And then you can go for enchanting. Enchanting is best in slot most of the time. Engineering helmet in phase 2 and in phase 5 will slightly be on top of what gear pieces that you can get in those phases. And then obviously the consumables for engineering are nice, but they're only best in slot in phase 2 and phase 5, whereas enchanting is best in slot throughout the entirety. Well, it's not best in slot, but it's best, it's strong throughout the entirety of TBC. So my advice, I would just go tailoring and enchanting. Just makes it simple, doesn't it? Maybe go for engineering if you like to do PvP now and again, and you like the consumables and the all the gimmicks that comes with engineering. But anyway guys, that's where I'm going to end the video there. If you have anything else to add to the video, obviously leave stuff like that in the comment section below. Subscribe for more videos like this coming very, very soon. My name is MetaGoblin. Until the next video, ciao.